Okay, enough with the lunging. No.
Back then, Friends didn't enter my life as a comedy. It arrived as a survival habit. I'd turn on the TV, hear the laughter before the punchlines, see 6 people gathered around a coffee table, and suddenly feel, at least here things are still okay. Here people can fail, say the wrong thing, love the wrong person, run out of money, and still have somewhere to come back to tomorrow. Central Perk is always warm. New York is always just beautiful enough. And the world, no matter how crooked it gets, can be soothed by a perfectly timed, Chandler-style sarcastic remark. It was only when I started digging into the behind-the-scenes stories that I was jolted into realizing this Friends was never as harmless as it looked. Behind the canned laughter were actors walking into auditions with $11 in their pockets, jokes written in the middle of addiction and depression, decisions that nearly erased entire characters, and social anxieties that terrified the network more than low ratings ever could. What follows are 20 strange, surprising, and at times very dark facts about Friends. If you're ready, hit like, and let's open up the things we've been laughing at for years without ever really daring to look straight at them. 20. The Friends fountain wasn't in New York. I still remember watching the opening credits of Friends as something completely self-evident. 6 people dancing in the rain, a sparkling fountain behind them. No map, no explanation needed, we were certain it was New York. Manhattan. Their city. I never questioned it. And perhaps no one ever did. But that memory is wrong. The truth is that iconic opening sequence was never filmed in New York. There were no late nights with the crew shooting in Manhattan. Everything was done after midnight on the Warner Brothers backlot in Burbank, California, thousands of miles away from New York. The fountain at the center of the image was nothing more than a built prop, not a real location that ever existed in the city. For years, tourists wandered through New York asking for directions, checking maps, searching for the Friends fountain, convinced they simply hadn't gone to the right place yet. And of course, they never found it. Not because New York had changed, but because it had never existed there in the first place. This was the first trick, and also the most perfect one that Friends ever pulled. Television created a New York warmer than real life, prettier than real life, and easier to live in than real life, a city built not from concrete and streets, but from lighting, music, and collective memory. 19. Matt LeBlanc auditioned for Joey with only $11. You probably still remember Joey Tribbiani, the guy who always walked into a room with confident swagger, a hungry stomach, and an unshakable belief that everything's gonna be okay. Joey ate without looking at prices spent money as if tomorrow had never been invented, and lived with a carefree innocence that was both irritating and endearing. What few people realize is this: that carefree attitude didn't come from comfort. It came from someone who had stood very close to the edge in real life. When Matt LeBlanc auditioned for Joey on Friends, he had exactly $11 left in his pocket. Not $11 for fun, $11 for everything. For food. For gas. For surviving a few more days if the audition failed. LeBlanc walked into the casting room, not with confidence, but with a feeling painfully familiar to anyone standing at the brink. If this doesn't work, I don't know where I go next. Then, Friends happened. On the day he received his first paycheck, LeBlanc didn't buy anything expensive. He didn't throw a big celebration. The first thing he did was simply go out and eat a truly satisfying meal. The kind of meal you have after being hungry for far too long, when you can finally breathe without counting every dollar. Around the same time, somewhere else, Courteney Cox used her first paycheck to buy a car. A very different choice, steady and long-term. One person needed to survive first. The other was already thinking about tomorrow. And maybe that's why Joey on screen, carefree, eating everything in sight. Trusting that tomorrow will be fine carries something deeply real. Not because he doesn't know what lack feels like, but because the man playing him once stood very close to it. What about you? Did you ever find yourself caring about Joey a little more after knowing this? 18. Courteney Cox miscarried just before the episode where Emma is born. Do you remember the episode where Rachel gives birth to Emma? The moment when the whole group crowds into the hospital room. Awkward joking. Waiting for a new life to arrive, one of the warmest and happiest episodes of Friends. But behind it lies a far darker truth. While the world watched a baby being born on screen in real life, one woman had just endured the pain of losing her child and still had to smile in front of the camera. Just one day before filming began, Courteney Cox suffered a miscarriage in real life. Not weeks earlier with time to recover. Not after everything was finished, but immediately before one of the happiest and most important episodes of the entire series. The next day, she still walked onto the set, still stood beside Jennifer Aniston, still smiled, delivered jokes, played off lines, remained. Monica energetic, anxious. Funny as if nothing had happened. Bitterly ironic. Monica is the one who names the newborn baby on screen while in real life. Courteney Cox's own child never even had the chance to be given a name. On screen, it was a moment of new life. Off-screen, Courteney Cox had to maintain a cheerful performance while carrying a very real loss. No shot reveals it. No line of dialogue hints at the pain, and there was no moment that allowed her to stop. Friends remains a safe haven for its audience. But for those in front of the camera, sometimes it was a place where they had to keep performing, even as their real lives were breaking apart into pieces. 17. Joey's white dog statue wasn't a prop. Almost everyone has the same reaction. The first time they see the huge white dog statue in Joey's apartment, it's too much, too tacky, and looks like it was put there purely to annoy the audience. We laugh at the absurdity classic Friends get rich and immediately buy something completely ridiculous. But years later, that reaction starts to change once the truth behind the statue comes out. The towering figure in Joey's apartment was not a prop designed for a visual gag. It was a good luck gift given by a close friend to Jennifer Aniston when she was just starting her acting career. An odd, slightly silly object, but one filled with the hope of someone afraid their friend might not survive Hollywood. When the show needed something truly wrong for the episode where Joey becomes wealthy and starts shopping without restraint, Aniston brought that very personal item onto the set. And what no one expected was this: audiences loved it. So much so that the producers decided to keep the statue permanently in the world of Friends. A real-life object entered the show. A detail meant as a joke became an icon. And that feels very Friends because the entire series in the end was built from things that were accidental, strange, and yet somehow always exactly right. 16. Matthew Perry. Filmed Friends while deep in addiction. For anyone watching the show, Chandler Bing was always the safest place in Friends. Whenever the mood grew heavy, Chandler appeared perfectly timed sarcasm, just smart enough wit, always keeping things under control with a line that made the whole room laugh. On screen, he was the one who never let everything fall apart. What's heartbreaking is this. While our memories preserve Chandler as a life raft, the man behind that laughter was quietly sinking out of sight. For many years during Friends, Matthew Perry struggled with severe drug addiction and depression. There were periods when his body visibly changed from one season to the next. There were days when he walked onto the set with a single goal: to stay upright until the laughter came. Later in life, Perry admitted something chilling. There are many episodes I don't remember filming at all. This is the central contradiction that can't be avoided. The audience laughs, the actor endures. Bursts of laughter echo on set while the personal life of the person creating it is being worn down day by day. That's why when we rewatch Friends today, Chandler's lines suddenly carry another layer of meaning. The sarcasm is no longer just a joke. It feels like a shield, a form of self-defense, an attempt to keep things light not only for the audience but for himself. 15. Joey owed Chandler. Nearly $120,000 over 10 seasons. Are you like me? Watching Friends, we always think the money issues between Joey and Chandler are just a joke. Joey Tribbiani is carefree, broke, but optimistic. Chandler Bing complains half-heartedly, then pulls out his wallet. We laugh, assuming it's sitcom friendship, lots of talk, little accounting, and in the end, no one really minds. Until a fan sat down and actually did the math. Line by line across all 10 seasons of Friends rent, food, daily expenses, all the loans that were never asked to be repaid. The final number is so stark it shatters the joke 197.60, nearly $120,000, not for a business deal, not for an emergency, but for a friend, quietly, repeatedly, no receipts, no conditions. On screen, it's a comedic bit about friendship and money. But look closer, and it's a very real act of sacrifice. Chandler isn't just a roommate or the funny guy. He's the silent financial backbone, the one standing behind Joey so he can keep moving forward without worry. And perhaps what lingers most isn't the number itself, but the realization that friendship in Friends isn't measured only in laughter. It's measured in expenses that are never mentioned again. 14. Matt LeBlanc once had a quiet crush on Jennifer Aniston. For years watching Friends, we grew used to seeing Joey and Rachel as just good friends, relaxed, playful, close enough to tease each other, but always stopping at exactly the right point. No tension, no excess, a very safe relationship. It wasn't until much later when Matt LeBlanc spoke in an interview for Friends, till the end, that people learned there had once been a very human moment off-screen. He admitted that he'd had a quiet crush on Jennifer Aniston. Not a shocking confession, no headlines, just a line as gentle as the feeling itself. At the beginning, I had a little crush on Jen, but I think everyone did. What matters is that it never became a scandal. It didn't disrupt the rhythm of the set. It didn't break the chemistry. It didn't turn Friends into a messy behind-the-scenes story. Everything stayed where it belonged, work remained work, and the feeling passed carefully set aside. It reflected Aniston's natural magnetism at the time, an effortless kind of appeal, and also showed that the Friends set was close enough for emotions to arise and professional enough that no one crossed the line. In the end, what remained wasn't a romance but a lasting friendship, the very thing Friends both on-screen and off always tried to protect. 13. How you doing? Joey's legendary pickup line. Some lines you hear once and forget. Others only need a single word stressed just right and the whole memory snaps back to life. With Friends, that moment is Joey Tribbiani tilting his head, lowering his voice, flashing a confident smile and saying, "How you doing?" Just 4 words. Not poetic, not clever, slightly stupid even. But in Joey's mouth, played by Matt LeBlanc, it became a cultural weapon. Not because it actually worked as a pickup line, but because it carried an entire attitude toward life, carefree, reckless, and convinced you're always allowed to take a shot. The line quickly escaped the sitcom. People repeated it, used it in real life, laughed even while knowing full well it would probably fail. And in 2005, that popularity was officially sealed when TV Guide ranked How You Doing at number 4 on its list of the 20 greatest catchphrases in television history. August 21st, 2005 issue. A short line, but powerful enough to define a character, and more broadly, an era of television that believed if your confidence was big enough, the world would laugh with you, no matter how foolish you looked. Is there another iconic line you still remember? Tell us in the comments. 12. Phoebe and Chandler were originally supporting characters, and Chandler was once written as gay. We're so used to watching Friends as the story of 6 equals each one distinct. No one extra, no one expendable. Chandler always lands the perfectly timed sarcasm. Phoebe is the offbeat piece that somehow completes the puzzle. Everything feels as if it was perfectly planned from the start. But what most people don't know is this: originally, they weren't even meant to be main characters. Phoebe and Chandler were written simply to hang around for laughs. With Chandler, the creators even seriously considered writing him as gay, not as a big twist, but as a comedic type based on difference and social satire at the time. Then Matthew Perry walked into the audition room, and everything shifted. Perry didn't bring a character defined by orientation. He brought anxiety, self-mockery, and a fragile kind of humour. Joking as a way to hide the fear of being left behind. The direction changed. Chandler was no longer written as gay, but traces of the original idea remained in the script's jokes about gay-coded mannerisms, musical theatre interests, the way his speech is teased by friends. Not to define him, but to underline something else, Chandler doesn't fit neatly into any traditional model of masculinity. Chandler was rewritten, refined, and grew alongside Matthew Perry. Just like Phoebe, who evolved from an eccentric side character into an irreplaceable emotional core of the group. 11. Monica's apartment number was changed mid-series. You may never have noticed, because Monica Geller's apartment always feels right. So right that we never stop to ask, where exactly is it? What floor? What number? We remember the purple door, the narrow hallway, and the feeling of home every time the group walks in. But in the early episodes of Friends, there was a small detail quietly wrong. At first, Monica's apartment was numbered 5. The problem is that by Manhattan logic, that number almost certainly places it on the ground floor, which completely contradicts the stairs, the elevated views, and the unmistakable sense that they live several floors up, like typical New Yorkers. The people who caught the mistake weren't the crew, it was the audience. Sharp-eyed fans pointed out the inconsistency, and instead of ignoring it, the production team quietly fixed it. From the middle of season 1 onward, Monica's apartment became number 20, more logical, more believable, and never mentioned again. Over time, the detail turned into an inside code among Friends fans, a marker for those who've watched closely enough, long enough, and often enough. A small error corrected not to be perfect, but to keep that world believable. 10. The cast's historic salary negotiation. In our memories, Friends is a show about pure friendship. 6 people sitting side by side on the couch, no one more important than the other, no one pushed to the edge. But there was one moment when that friendship stepped outside the script and shook the entire television industry. Into the later seasons, when Friends had become a global phenomenon, the 6 actors faced a familiar Hollywood reality power imbalance. Some stars shine brighter, some get paid more. Everything could have followed the old path, but they chose not to. Instead of negotiating individually, they stood as a unit. No one signed early, no one took more, no one let another be left behind. The result was a number unprecedented at the time, $1 million per episode for each of them. This wasn't just a financial victory, it was a statement. Friends wasn't 6 separate stars sharing a frame, it was a single, inseparable ensemble. And if the show depended on that balance, real life had to reflect it too. The ripple effect came fast. After Friends' major casts began negotiating together, power shifted. Norms changed, a door that had long been tightly shut finally cracked open. But the greatest legacy of that negotiation may not be the number itself. It's that rare moment when Hollywood witnessed real friendship become real power without a script, without canned laughter, and without anyone having to dim themselves so someone else could shine. 9. Jennifer Aniston. Almost left before season 2, we all remember Rachel Green as someone who was always there, from the bride who runs out on her wedding to the woman who gradually grows up over 10 seasons of Friends. So familiar that we never ask what if Rachel hadn't stayed. But there was a very brief and very dangerous moment when that almost happened. Just before Friends truly broke through, Jennifer Aniston was caught between 2 worlds. She had signed on to a CBS pilot called Muddling Through. If that pilot had been picked up as a full series, Aniston would have been forced to leave Friends. No Rachel in season 2. No decade-long emotional arc. And perhaps no icon as we remember her today. Then the turn came, not through a grand decision, but through failure. Muddling Through was cancelled after only a few episodes, and Friends kept Aniston by the narrowest margin. Sitcom history can be that fragile. One different scheduling choice. One network decision made a few weeks earlier. And so Rachel stayed. Not because fate decreed it, but because a small television misstep accidentally preserved an entire icon. Do you think anyone could have replaced Jennifer Aniston's Rachel? Leave your thoughts below. 8. Matthew Perry courted Julia Roberts with quantum physics. It sounds like a joke, and at first, everyone thought it was. A sitcom actor trying to invite one of the biggest movie stars in the world to appear on Friends. Surely that would require a call from a PR department or some kind of behind-the-scenes deal. But Matthew Perry did it differently. When he heard that Julia Roberts might consider appearing on Friends, Perry didn't call her directly. He sent flowers. Then he sent her an essay on quantum physics exactly as Roberts had half-jokingly, half-seriously requested. Not to show off how smart he was, but to prove one thing: I'm genuinely serious. And strangely enough, it worked. Julia Roberts agreed to appear in the post-Super Bowl episode, one of the most valuable time slots on American television at the time. The episode became an event. Viewers poured in. The on-screen chemistry exploded. And the story didn't end there. The two of them dated briefly in real life after filming. And so, from an idea that initially sounded like just for fun, Friends gained one of the most memorable episodes in its history. All starting with a bouquet of flowers, a few pages of writing, and the belief that trying is always worth it. 7. Courteney Cox almost played Rachel, but she chose Monica. In our memories, Rachel Green and Monica Geller seemed destined for their respective actresses. So much so that it's hard to imagine things ever being different. But from the beginning, Hollywood saw it another way. During the casting stage of Friends, the producers initially had Courteney Cox in mind for Rachel, a role considered more appealing, easier to like, and more clearly aligned with television formulas. Then Cox did something very rare. She turned down the more favoured role. In Friends, the reunion, Courteney Cox revealed that she had personally asked to switch parts. The reason was simple and instinctive. She understood Monica better. She saw in Monica's strength a need for control, anxiety about doing everything right, traits Cox felt closely reflected herself. The result is something we all know. Monica Geller became one of the most iconic female characters in sitcom history, strong yet fragile, controlling, yet deeply in need of love. And in the opposite direction, Jennifer Aniston stepped into Rachel as if it were the place she had always belonged. Looking back, that moment quietly changed the course of Friends, reminding us of a simple truth. Hollywood often forgets casting the right person matters more than casting by formula. 6. Friends prepared 200 staff to handle LGBTQ+ complaints. Do you remember that episode when Friends suddenly stepped away from light dating stories to face a much more solemn moment? It was the one with the lesbian wedding, 1996, the wedding of Carol and Susan. At the time, mainstream television still considered this a sensitive topic. The producers feared backlash, boycotts, complaint letters, waves of outrage from primetime audiences. The anxiety ran so deep that NBC hired 200 part-time employees in advance solely to answer complaint phone calls after the episode aired. It was an extreme precaution, perfectly reflecting the mindset of the system: we're about to touch something we shouldn't. Then the episode aired. The phones did ring, but not the way they expected. The total number of protest calls received 11. Just 11. That contrast says a great deal, not about Friends, but about the gap between network fear and the quiet acceptance of audiences. In hindsight, this wasn't just a brave episode. It was a milestone, proof that Friends was ahead of its time in LGBTQ+ representation, and that viewers were ready for it far earlier than television executives ever imagined. 5. Matthew Perry didn't recognize Fat Monica in real life. I still clearly remember the first time I watched the flashback scenes of Fat Monica on Friends. Not just because they were funny, but because they felt strangely unfamiliar. The way she stood, the way she smiled, the way she moved. Everything made me forget it was just makeup and prosthetics. And it turns out I wasn't the only one fooled. Matthew Perry once walked past the set and didn't recognize that the person standing in front of him was Courteney Cox. Not because he wasn't paying attention, but because the transformation was so convincing that it fooled even her co-star. This small detail says more than just a funny behind-the-scenes story. It shows that the Fat Monica scenes weren't done half-heartedly. They were treated seriously as part of Monica Geller's real past, a place where insecurity, self-improvement, and the desire to be seen were placed right alongside laughter. And perhaps that's why Fat Monica has stayed so vividly in viewers' memories, a reminder that sometimes television magic is powerful enough to deceive even those standing inside the frame. 4. Marcel the monkey was a behind-the-scenes nightmare. Everyone remembers Marcel the monkey, the small creature perched on Ross's shoulder in the early seasons of Friends. On screen, Marcel felt perfectly sitcom cute, slightly out of place. A living joke meant to underline Ross's awkward loneliness. He seemed harmless, brief, and lovable. Behind the camera, however, Marcel was played by two different monkeys, and neither cooperated in the way television demands. They damaged props, wandered out of position mid-scene, disrupted performances, and caused constant scheduling delays. The moments that looked natural on screen were the result of countless failed takes and tense adjustments. The person most affected was David Schwimmer. He later admitted that acting with Marcel was almost traumatizing, not out of fear, but because of the complete lack of control. Eventually, the production team had to make a firm decision. Marcel was written out after season 2. In the show, the monkey is gently sent away. In real life, it was a necessary release, one that allowed Friends to continue existing at all. 3. The Friends characters' names came from All My Children. Have you ever wondered why these names sound so familiar? Ross, Rachel, Monica, Joey, Chandler, Phoebe. They're simple, everyday names, just ordinary enough to make us believe these people could exist somewhere in real life. That familiarity wasn't accidental. The creators of Friends were longtime fans of the classic soap opera All My Children. When naming the 6 main characters, they quietly borrowed names from an earlier generation of television. A subtle nod of respect. Ross comes from Ross Chandler, Joey from Joey Martin, Chandler from the Chandler family, Monica from Monique Daisy Cortlandt, Rachel Green from Janet Green, Phoebe from Phoebe Tyler Wallingford. This wasn't copying. It wasn't a remake. It was inheritance. Friends, though, a modern sitcom of the 1990s, carried the DNA of classic television, where characters were built to live alongside the audience over long stretches of time, grow up with them, and become part of their daily routine. 2. The paintings in Central Perk were changed. Every 3 episodes, in our memories, Central Perk feels frozen in time. The familiar couch, the warm yellow lighting, 6 people sitting in the same spot on afternoons that seem to last forever in Friends. Everything feels so constant that we believe the cafe never really changed. But in reality, Central Perk was always quietly evolving in a very subtle way. Few people noticed that the artwork hanging on the cafe walls was replaced every 3 episodes. Not because of story reasons, not because of special events, but because the set designers didn't want the space to feel like a soundstage stuck in time. They rotated paintings, photographs, and small arrangements just like a real cafe does, without us ever paying attention. A living space needs to live, to shift, to carry traces of time, to feel slightly different today than it did yesterday. More importantly, it made Central Perk more than just a setting. It became a silent character growing with the group of friends and aging alongside the audience's memories. 1. The original Friends theme song wasn't I'll Be There For You. For anyone who has watched the show, Friends begins with clapping hands, 6 people splashing around a fountain, and a promise so simple it almost feels childlike. I'll be there for you. It's so familiar that we never question it. Could it ever have been a different song? But it almost was. Early on, the theme song considered for Friends was Shiny Happy People by REM, a pop-rock track perfectly in tune with the 1990s upbeat and radio-friendly. The problem was that it was too complete, too polished, too much like a standalone hit rather than an invitation into an intimate world. So the decision was made to change course. Instead of using an already famous song, the show chose I'll Be There For You by the Rembrandts, a track that feels as if it were written solely for those 6 people. The result is something we all know. The song doesn't just open the show, it opens memory. As soon as the first notes play, people stop listening with their ears and start feeling. Thursday nights, canned laughter, an old TV set, and the sense that you're not alone, even if only for 22 minutes. I'll Be There For You outgrew its role as a theme song. It became a shared promise for an entire generation. A line friends never needed to repeat in dialogue because it was spoken at the very start of every episode. Perhaps that's the strangest thing about looking back at Friends after all these years. The show hasn't changed, only we have. Back then, we watched Friends to laugh. Now, we rewatch it and realise that behind the seemingly light dialogue were real money struggles, real loneliness, real addiction, real career choices, and moments that nearly sent television history down a completely different path. Friends was never just a sitcom about 6 friends. It was a world safe enough to hide in when the outside world felt too loud. A New York that never existed yet felt more real than many places we've actually lived. And maybe that's why even after knowing all its behind-the-scenes secrets, we still return to Central Perk. Not to discover something new, but to remember who we were when we first watched this show. If you grew up with Friends too, leave a comment. Which detail on this list made you see the show differently? And if you want to keep exploring the darker sides, the near misses, and the hidden truths behind works that seem harmless on the surface, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next videos.